Okay, on to chapter 12. Lucky last 12. I remember like when I started writing it, and there was like, a number of stories. How many stories are they going to be, and da da da. And I love that I landed at 12. 12 is my I was born on the 12th, so 12th is a 12 is a really good number for me. But it also kind of like, if I look at all the stories from chapter 1 to chapter 12, it's like beginning to end type
Mm.
of thing. There's a journey there. You can see, like, the start of the journey and the end of the journey. So chapter 12 was really, for me, I wanted it to be something that was like, you know connected to what happens at the end. And in my head, it was more like, old people, elder, and they're kind of like the holders of wisdom, the holders of culture, the holders of all these things. And so the Bemba proverb is umukulu tapusaka. Ah, sorry. No, that's not it.
Scratch that.
Umukulu apusa akabwe tapusa akevo. Yeah, that's the way. Umukulu apusa akabwe tapusa akevo. An elder can miss a bullseye, but can never miss words of wisdom. And this one also is very kind of like steeped in that African culture of like elders being wise, elders being the holders of truth, and their role is to guide the next generation, to guide the young people. And so for those who play darts and all of that, there's the bullseye. If you put that, that's all the scores. And so a kabwa is actually like a stone. Like if you throw a stone, you can miss where you're trying to hit. So
Mm.
it's more like, an elder can miss throwing a stone at something, but they can never miss telling you something wise.
Mm.
And, I think about that as well, like from the context of who holds the knowledge, who holds the wisdom, and how do you pass it down,
Yeah.
and how do you pass it next generation type of thing. So it kind of like, for me, it sits in that. And it has a really strong consideration for me, um, because of my journey in Australia. I'm the only one in my family here with my younger brother. But,
Mm.
my generation, that's it. In terms of like blood family, it's just me and my brother. My
Mm.
my parents are not here, my grandparents, they're somewhere else. And so if you think about like, our lives here, if you've come as, an adult, and then you have kids, and you are the generation that then gives the wisdom. So,
Yeah.
we're kind of like the elders who are giving, next generation type of thing. And like you said, I think you said this in one of the episodes, where you kind of like, but the truth and the culture and the value that was handed down to you, and you haven't been fully immersed in it. So you have a watered down version, right?
Yeah.
So we keep going, giving our watered down version until who knows what. But sometimes we're not even giving the watered down version.
Yeah.
So are we missing? Are we missing our roles as the elders and the holders of culture? Um, yeah.
Yeah. That's a very good one. I think we are. And like, even me personally, I was missing this for a while. Like, I had no clue. And then one time I was going through the work. There's a Canadian philosopher. His name is Dr. John Vervaeke, and he did this body of work. He's done like I think two series on YouTube now. He did one called "Awakening from the Meaning Crisis." It's like a
From
50
the what?
epi-
Meaning?
yeah, "Awakening from the Meaning Crisis." Yeah, it's like a 50-part uh, series. It's like 1 hour each, and he's trying to sort of like, he's making a case that the world is, people are very sensitive to the crisis of meaning these days, and uh, but there's lots of ways to go around it, and he has all these solutions that he keeps sharing through um,
I'm
his
still here.
yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so he talks about all these solutions that he's going through in his uh, you know series. And one thing that like really really stood out for me was that he actually spoke about it. He says, like, when you ask people what they do for fitness, everybody will tell you, they'll go to the gym. You ask people, what do you do to, make sure you're managing your, like, you're eating, right? Like, people will tell you about their diets. Like, what are you doing for your financials? They're saving, they're doing all the things, they have a bank account. Um, but then you ask them, what do you do for wisdom? And in most cases, people don't have a thing they do for wisdom. And when I was listening to that, I was like, oh, actually, yeah, what do I do? I don't, I don't have a thing that I do. And so it was very confronting in a way, in that I was like, oh, wow, it got me thinking about it. So I started to think about it. I was like, okay. And, he shared some resources, but of course you don't stop there. You continue researching. And what I found was that even even without like reading lots of people's works or people's books, which is great, like there's a lot of wisdom everywhere
Mm.
in all these published works, but also within our own life experiences, within our traditions, within our cultures, there's lots and lots of wisdom, because essentially wisdom is like having the ability to switch between perspectives
Mm.
as fast as you can. It's like you can merge perspectives together. You can put together so many and see in a broad way, or you could switch between one or the other quickly. But the more you can do that, uh, the more you'd say the more experiential data you have available to you, which then gives you more options. And then
Yeah.
that's why I guess you find the wisdom in the older people, because they have more life experience. They have more, they have gathered a lot of
Mm.
historical information through their lived experience that they can then leverage and go like, um, I've made this mistake like 50 times, and I learned this lesson that I can now pass you on. And you don't have to go through the 50 mistakes. You can just take this nugget and know that it is well researched
It
and
has
it
been
works.
through.
Yeah, it has been tested.
And we also have examples of that dude who didn't live through them, and look what happened to him. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so when you start to think about it, I was like, oh, actually, you need to be working on that. You need to be taking, life a bit more seriously. Like, proverbs, yeah, you have to take them seriously. They mean something and they're really important. How you need to know how to ingest them, and then how to use them and use them appropriately. And they will work if you
Mm.
know how they work and what to use them for. But you have to, invest in that. And if you're not, the time when you're going to need it, the information will not be there, and then you will fall into what we are talking about earlier, right? Like in the previous chapters, like you're alone, and then you need support, and then you're overly critical to yourself. You have no information source to use to counter whatever is sort of like deceiving your mind at the time. And
Yeah.
so yeah, for me, I have learned that, and now it's partly what inspired me to kind of like even start a podcast, because I was like, yeah, we need to get in the practice of
Mm.
talking through these different perspectives, these different lived experiences, and like we said earlier, I think in chapter 10 that everyone's experience, their pain is to themselves, right?
Yeah.
And you can only have your own version. But if we share how we've dealt with our own pains, we can borrow the techniques and we can borrow the skill sets and be like, oh, okay. So I guess when I was going through this painful thing, I could try my ass's technique and then maybe that could work because I don't know. Like I don't know what to do right now. But
Yes.
at least I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
borrow
yeah.
what my assay did. And then maybe that could help. And so I guess getting into that practice, but that means we have to get out of our shells. We have to go out there. I have to come find my essay and talk to my essay more. Then maybe she'll share something, and then I'll keep it. And then maybe later when I need it, it will be there.
It'll come in handy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's something about, what you said about where do we learn wisdom, or how to be wise? Like, where do we learn that, And part of it is the experience that you're going through. But a lot of it as well is the conversations and the different sharings that you have with people for you to then kind of like see life in different dimensions, because all I can see is life in my dimension of like, I'm a career person, I work in tech is amazing, and I'm in Melbourne. I'm a Melbourneite. We love coffee. um, but for me, wisdom is really a lot about outside of my experience and my lens of life. How can I use what I have in a new setting, in a different setting, which
Mm,
is why even, having conversations with people who you are not aligned with is actually quite good, because and sometimes you're always just like, oh my god, that person again, we're going to be arguing about something. But maybe it's not about arguing, but if you understand where they're coming from,
mm,
it's also data points for you to understand what that life is like.
yeah.
And maybe that's not the life you want, it's not your thing. Great. You don't even have to accept it.
Mm,
But that doesn't mean that you have to kind of like just separate those people out, because those people might actually add something. There's something that they're doing that you might find useful for your life. And I think in the earlier chapters we discussed, you gave the the story. I don't even know if we've recorded this. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't, maybe it's somewhere. But you know how you were talking about, how Solomon was really wise, and Solomon
yes.
was said to be the wisest,
Yeah.
the wisest king. But what he did was just understand people so much and
Yeah.
have them come up with the answers, the solutions to their things. And we're like, oh my God, he's so wise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yes,
The Solomon paradox. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so
Yeah.
I think I'm like, wisdom is like really an important aspect for our own growth,
Mm,
because it's one, what you are learning, what you have experienced, whatever, but also you being able to tell it to someone and it's becoming valuable to the other person
mm.
is the key.
Yeah. And it's look, it's your evidence. Like if you are alive in whatever form or shape, in whatever kind of being you are evidence of a certain pocket of wisdom. Like you would
Mm,
not be able to hold and sustain life without having some way of doing that. And whatever that way is a pocket of wisdom. And this cuts across like everything. Like you'll see researchers like become so shocked. They studied this forest, right? Like I should have spoken about this in the forest one. But they did study this forest that behaved like a human village. And
all right.
yeah, like the grown trees had a network of, I think they were using a network of mushrooms that they were networking their roots with to connect to other trees, and then they would redirect resources around the forest to go and rejuvenate areas of the forest that were dying. So, like if there was a fire and some trees get burnt out, they would come and find those trees actually grew back after the fire, and they were wondering how did that happen because no one replanted them. There was no one to do it manually, but actually there was a whole other network below the ground that was keeping track of the forest was an organism. Like it wasn't, we would just see trees, but then it's like,
Mm,
no, no, there's a reason the trees are together.
yeah.
Yeah. And so they shared resources, and but to be able to do that, like when you hear it described, like, oh, then you actually see how wise the forest is. Then you can actually get to the lens of, oh wow, I thought it was just a tree. I could just break off a leaf. It's like, yeah, you could do that, but it also has its own way of being in the world, right? Thinking about the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and like I say on my podcast, that as long as you're alive, as long as you're human, as long as you know how to do life, there is a whole big pocket of wisdom that's unique for that instance of you that is keeping you that way, and you need to take it seriously.
Yeah, yeah. I love I you need to send me that forest because you know I love trees, right? Like trees are just the perfect example and we're ruining the earth by cutting them all down. And they have networks, they have the wisdom of their roots and everything else in their ecosystem to keep themselves alive and keep the next generation of trees alive or keep the ones that are like, they've been ravaged, but we can still get them, which is why I love the root system of like,
Yeah.
roots are just amazing out there. The work that they're doing, the work that they're doing out there is just amazing. And I think even thinking about, like nature and how nature like has so many lessons for us. There's so much in even the story that you've shared about the network of the forest and the trees in that forest that I'm just like we we have so much to learn from nature and we choose to close our eyes and not. We choose to close our eyes because there's so much magic and also so much simplicity about life that we can learn from the nature around us and how, things just happen like clockwork when they need to happen. There's no force there unless we come and force things.
Yeah, and we have to take it, we have to take the opportunity to learn seriously. Like
Mm,
for me now, it's like since I learned this, now I make that active and being more proactive about it. Trying to learn something new, trying to be more open minded to ideas that like you're sharing before, like ideas I would completely be opposed to, uh, and learning that just because you're opposed to the idea doesn't mean it's completely false. So
mhm.
someone once said, like, nobody's wise enough to be 100% wrong.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, for you to actually be completely wrong, you have to put some effort in it. But similarly, you can't be 100% right.
yeah,
Yeah. So you
yeah.
have to kind of like find that balance. And so I think for me, knowing that, then even if I disagree, I know that there is some smidget of like truth or some rightness that they're speaking to. And if I listen long enough, or if I interact long enough, maybe I'll get to it. Like we can understand where they're coming from. Doesn't mean you have to subscribe,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but you will know what it is at least, and then you go like, okay, there is a thing there, and here's how it shows up, and this is how to work with or work around or
Yeah,
not engage,
or
and
not
that
engage in
that's
it.
useful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Very useful. And also, I think one last thing that came to my mind just around wisdom as well. Um, I really believe in there is time for different knowledge, because sometimes you will get to hear this wisdom or you get to hear this knowledge and it just won't make sense for you,
Yeah.
and you absolutely do nothing with it, and then you be at a different point in life when you're like, I consume it, I believe it, this is the truth.
Yeah.
I have had instances with that, even with books that I've reread, like years later, I reread it and I'm like, oh my God, I get it now. I get it. I couldn't get it then. Now I get it. It makes sense. Um, yeah, what are your thoughts on that? On like when the knowledge makes sense and it doesn't make sense sometimes because of like where you are at in life is
Yeah.
just going to help you absorb things.
Oh, totally, completely agree with that. It's like there's lots of things you're not ready for. And there's things, I guess, like this is why, we have that thing, where we come from, like that sort of like social hierarchy. It's like, you respect your elders. Those guys have been
Mm,
around. That, in essence, they're saying, look, those guys, like I come from a country that has, you'd say, an average age of about 30 years. Like it's considered one of the youngest populations in the world. And we're talking about 45 million people here.
mm,
But
mm.
the average age is about 30 years of age. And people go like, why? So what's going on? It's like, well, getting to that age is not easy. Like there's so many things that could wipe you out that you don't make it there. But and so from that, I guess like we start to appreciate, like if somebody managed to break through, yeah, take them seriously. They do whatever they're doing.
They're elders when they're
Yeah.
35.
hmm But whatever they're doing is working, so you better take it seriously. Yeah, but so I think like coming from that, it's very much the same. I think like in life, you're going through certain things, like I was speaking about before, the perspectives. They give you enough perspective to be able to see the sense in something, to see why certain things are the way they are. And before you have that perspective, you can't, you're not at a place where you will see it, because it's out of your reality. It's out of
Mm,
your space of of reality. And so you do need that, like and you'll see this even with books. Like you give an example of a book, like there's this book, I haven't even read it again because I tried to read it, it didn't make sense. What is it's a novel, Ulysses, right? There's a guy who wrote it. There's a novel called Ulysses, so I tried to read it, and I get in, I think 4 chapters in, I'm like, what is he talking about? And then, I kind of like do some research, and then there's all this body of works. Guys are like, oh yeah, that book, you have to go easy on it. You need to read about 4 or 5 bodies of work before you can get to that, because he's referencing from all those works, and all the jokes are coming from all those works. If you've read them, then you would know what he's talking about. I was like, oh,
mm.
okay. So then I tried to read the books, and I go like, oh, now as I was reading those books, I was also understanding the book that was saying, it's like, oh, this is where the joke comes from. Oh,
Yeah.
this is what he was referencing. Oh, that's what it means. And it's from a completely different world of my own. So I could not even relate. I could not
Mm,
even imagine that it's that way.
mm.
But now, like, I've walked through that and have developed that perspective. So now I can see it. But I had to work for it. It's not given. It's not gonna come free. And I
Yeah.
think we need to know that, and we need to appreciate that certain things are going to be earned, and it's going to take time. It could be life experience. It could just be, you know, strange life scenarios.
Mhm.
Could be age. Like you haven't reached the age where you have the patience to get
Yes.
through a
Yeah.
long body of work. Yeah.
Yeah. there's a bamboo proverb which is not in the book, which I do not like, but I also understand. And it says "kula umone." It's like they just tell you, grow up and you will see, because
Oh.
they're like they're not gonna tell you what. And I've always been annoyed at it because I'm like, but why can't you just tell me now? Why do I need to grow up and see? You are just like, test and learn yourself. You have
Yeah.
been through it. Tell me. But there's some things that it doesn't matter how much I'll tell you about it.
Mm.
Unless you go through it, you will not get it.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't. Many things are just meant to be. Uh, I think we learn the best through that. It's called participatory knowing. It's like you
Mm-hmm.
see children, they will learn by doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll figure out how to walk by trying to walk and then fall several times until eventually they find a way to not fall, and then we clap for them like, yay, you got
Yeah.
it finally.